What's up, Strength House Nation? This episode of the Strength House podcast, we're going to talk specifically about training high school athletes. Everything from talking to parents,
to the nuances of programming, to the little things that make a big difference. Plus, we got 2 awesome beers. You're not going to want to miss this one, guys.
The Strength House podcast, featuring Greg Robbins and Tony Bonvecchio.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Strength House podcast. We are on episode 12.
12.
Big number, the same number that Tom Brady wears, so we better bring our best this episode. We have a great episode for you. We are going to kind of build off what we did 2 weeks ago when we just talked about online training, and we're going to stick to one topic tonight. But before we get there, Tony, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, man.
Irish Josh, what's up?
Great, thank you.
What?
I'm great.
Are you sure?
He good? He's a little cranky because he's cutting weight for his powerlifting meet, which is in 9 days.
I think it's like 10.
10 days.
And he just rolled his ankle playing spike ball, so...
He's drinking Coke Zero and eating Quest bars, so he's your typical like person trying to see their abs that's not really that invested in health overall. So
and probably between the sugar alcohols in Josh's food and the beer in our glasses, there's probably going to be a decent amount of gas in this room tonight.
He didn't want to drink a beer tonight because there's too many calories, so instead he's crushing fake sugar instead.
So, 0 calories in Coke Zero, hence the name.
Yeah. Well, hey, good luck.
We'll see.
All right, so tonight our main topic, by request, we got a lot of requests about it, is training high school athletes. So I know a lot of people that tune in are familiar with, I guess you could say, Tony and I's day job, but we work at Cressy Sports Performance as strength coaches, so the majority of the clientele we see there are high school athletes, ages 13 to 18. That's what we deal with 35 hours a week. And the rest we dedicate to the general fitness and powerlifting crowd. But I think we have a fair amount of expertise on the subject. We recently did a full 2-day seminar on the subject, which went really well in New Jersey. And we figured with a week between having guests, let's stick to one topic. And I think the biggest thing I want to get across to everyone tuning in right now is we have a script full of stuff we want to talk about and some things that we've already got questions about via email. But this is really an open-ended subject tonight, so if there's something you want to know about training high school athletes, please leave a comment on the Facebook or on Instagram, and we'll definitely stray from our plan to answer questions. We're totally okay with questions tonight, and we'll make sure that we get to all of them.
I think it's a great topic. I think a lot of our listeners are either coaches who are going to train high school athletes or they're parents of high school athletes. So I think it's going to be a good topic that our listeners can really take a lot away from.
Yeah. Well, before we get there, let's first dive into something high school athletes should never do because they're not old enough, at least in this country, is to drink beer.
What's the legal drinking age in Ireland, Josh?
18, but
18?
Not really stoked.
It's a bit of a cultural thing. Whoa, there goes
Man
Facebook.
down!
There goes Facebook. Sorry, ladies and gents. And just like that, 2 viewers go away. Sorry, they must have gotten motion sickness.
There's a few questions coming in, but...
All right, keep the questions coming in. Irish Josh will actually have to put him to work tonight, so he'll have to go back and review those.
Do you have the energy for that with your caloric deficit?
We'll make it happen. He's caffeinated on Coke Zero. He's ready to go. All right, so tonight we have 2 great beer offerings as well. The first one is my choice. It's going to be from the Vale Brewing Company in Virginia. I forget which town in Virginia. Richmond, Virginia. We've actually had quite a few different brews from the Vale. Always pretty solid.
Yep. They've all been pretty good.
Yeah. So tonight we have a triple dry hopped India Pale Ale, which is actually a wheat pale ale.
Yep. So this is Master Shredder Cubed.
Master Shredder Cubed.
Hard to see on the main computer, but folks at home tuning in right now, you can see that, and Vail does a lot of their cans like with the same can art, and then they paste this little label on here. A lot of microbrewers do that. But the original Master Shredder can is really, really cool. It's like this guy up on stage with long hair, like playing a guitar. Definitely a heavy metal guy. So when I first had Master Shredder, I really loved the can art. You can see that even the font is kind of a play on our favorite Kings of Metal, Metallica. I'm sporting the And Justice for All t-shirt. Probably going to be wearing nothing but Metallica clothing up until not this weekend, but the following weekend when we see them at Gillette Stadium, home of the
New England Patriots,
reigning Super Bowl champions.
Yep.
All right, let's crack into this. Gee,
we have some struggles over there with the Facebook. I mean, it pours. This is pretty dark. Obviously, it's going to be very cloudy since it's been dry hopped.
I need some sort of tripod over here. Oh, we're going to put the...
Tell your listeners, viewers, to check out the National High School Strength Coaches Association, started by some amazing leaders in the high school strength coach world. I'm actually a member. That's really good.
All right.
I can add you guys in.
I think I am a member just recently. I think I just joined this week.
It's good.
We can include that perhaps in the show notes.
Yeah.
I'm lagging a little bit behind.
All right. Once Tony gets his shit together... No, I'm just kidding.
This does pour kind of dark.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can't wait any longer. I'm going to drink it.
So the original Master Shredder is a wheat IPA. This one is a IPA that's been triple dry hopped. 5.5% ABV. Give it a little sniff.
Definitely interesting. It tastes weedy. Kind of like Wheaties.
Yeah, wow. That's really interesting. It almost has like a cereal taste to it.
Yeah.
I like it. It's going to take some getting used to.
Yeah, at first it's...
So normally with a wheat ale or a wheat IPA, you can expect to kind of have that very like bready taste to it. Common wheat ales that our listeners might be familiar with, like Hefeweizens. So like
Hefeweizen.
Yeah. So like Shock Top is a wheat. Like Sam Adams, Sam Summer is a wheat. Little something something by Lagunitas, a wheat. So our beer fact tonight is coming at you from beeradvocate.com. We're going to explain what constitutes a wheat
beer fact.
IPA. So as this loads up here, because I don't have it off the top of my head, and I'm going to cite my sources here. So this is coming from Beer Advocate. So a wheat ale is an Americanized version of a Hefeweizen. These beers range within the pale to golden range in color, reminiscent of a Hefeweizen in appearance, unless filtered. So again, Hefeweizens you probably recognize. Shock Top, UFO, those are kind of the more common ones that you might see on tap at most bars around the U.S. So a German Weizen flavors and aromas of banana esters and clove-like phenols will not be found in an American pale wheat ale. Most use a substantial percentage of wheat malt versus barley. So some stats that I saw earlier was you might see up to like 70% wheat malt, which is going to give it kind of that breadiness. Hop character will be low to high, but most are moderate in bitterness. I would say this one's not all that bitter.
Not bitter.
Hence and part of that's from the triple dry hopping, right? So that's going to reduce some of the bitterness. We talked about dry hopping a little bit further back, a couple episodes back. So there may be some fruitiness from ale fermentation, though most examples use a fairly neutral ale yeast, resulting in a clean fermentation with little to no diacetyl. Did I get that?
That's good enough for me.
As tough a word as epitome. These are often served with a lemon wedge, which you might see like a Blue Moon. God help you if you ever order that at a bar when you're with me. I will disown you.
I know a few guys that do.
Yeah, but that's fine. It says, often served with a lemon wedge, in parentheses, popularized by Americans, so Josh, you're off the hook, to either cut the wheat or yeast edge, which many either find to be a flavorful snap or an insult and something that damages the beer's taste and head retention. So no citrus fruit in our beer tonight. We're just going as is.
a little bit of like a pineapple-y taste.
Definitely pineapple, yeah, for sure.
Definitely weedy too.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Cereal beer. But I like it.
It's good. It's growing on me as we drink it too.
Yeah, I certainly know that individuals who are claim to be beer enthusiasts but really have no fucking idea what they're talking about often default to the Shock Tops and the Blue Moons of the world, as you know, once they move up a level from Bud Light and Coors Light.
Right, okay. Is that still considered a beer enthusiast?
I don't think it's a misguided beer consumer, I want to say.
Okay, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
All right, well.
So the style can still be good.
Yeah.
Just don't order Blue Moon.
That's one thing I've noticed with the Veil too, is that they definitely try a lot of different styles.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't seek out as many of their other styles. We mostly go with the IPAs, and this is a wheat IPA, but
so we're branching out a little.
A little. We're getting our feet wet. A little bit different area.
Yeah.
So
for those of you who haven't been keeping score at home, this is episode 12, and we've tasted IPAs on 11 of 12 episodes so far.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. We took a detour, one stout episode, but
we're branching out. Give us time. Let our palates expand.
Summer's coming up. Sour season goes as.
We have some sours we could try. Yeah. We like other beer, but we're IPA connoisseurs, if you will.
So that's your beer fact for the evening. What constitutes a wheat IPA?
All right, let's get into the training talk, and let's talk about training some high school athletes. So I'll throw the first question at you, Tony, and this actually came from an email we received today when we announced that we would be doing this topic. How do you best? It comes from Jordan. Jordan asks, how do you best fit loaded carries into your athletes in season / off season? How does volume and intensity change during the in season and off season? I don't know if he means on the loaded carries or just in general. So why don't I split this into this question? How do you best fit loaded carries into your athletes' programs?
So loaded carries referring to farmers walks, two-handed variations, one-handed variations, carries like perhaps overhead, maybe carrying odd objects like a big medicine ball or a sandbag or something at the chest. Loaded carries are awesome.
Yep.
You know, I think like I'm paraphrasing Dan John, but like picking up heavy stuff and carrying it around takes care of a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And I like to use those a lot for athletes that are perhaps a little bit less coordinated because they're pretty foolproof. You know, loaded carries can almost serve as like single leg exercise. You know, you get a pretty good lower body stimulus just walking, you know, putting one foot in front of the other, almost like you would like sometimes for a sled push. I often put them closer to the end of a training session, just because, you know, they're not as technique intensive as a squat or a deadlift or a press or a row. So if you're fatigued in some way, you know, you're a little bit less likely to slip into bad technique. So I typically put them at the end of a training session after you've done kind of your heavy compound lifts, any sort of single leg stuff like a lunge, and probably at the same point in a program or before any sort of like direct anterior core training.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I would echo that. Say I would usually put them. I mean, I think you could draw a comparison saying you wouldn't have someone do like heavy sled pushes at the beginning of their program because you're just gonna get a wet noodle of an athlete for the rest of that training program. So yeah, I think it's best to put them at the end. Like you said, they have a low barrier to entry for the most part. There's so many different variations that you can use loaded carries to just help athletes, you know, just get stronger in general. But the nice thing about them is that they do blend a more dynamic exercise in with good heavy strength training. So I would think of them as a dynamic core exercise. A lot of times, there's something we touch upon in our seminar is, I think core training, we have a lot of great exercises out there for quote-unquote core training, but we don't really move through a good spectrum a lot of times is what I see. So we see a lot of like chops and lifts and prone bridges and side bridges, and it's like no one ever graduates from that. And if you think about it from a sporting context, most of the things that you do on the field or in competition happen very fast. So the idea should be to progress things from something very static like a chop or like from like a prone bridge to something a little bit less static like say pay-off press or a chop or a lift, and eventually get to the point where you're doing things like loaded carries and med ball throws and actually treating those like core exercises. And then as you said too with the loaded carries, like they're great for ankle and hip stability as well because you are on one leg for albeit like a very small amount of time, but it still happens. So they meet a lot of purposes for a lot of different athletes, especially when we talk about like that ankle and the hip stability part of it, which can be huge for a lot of team sport athletes.
And specifically to the question, talking about in season versus off season, loaded carries have pretty much only like an isometric component. I mean, it is dynamic because you're moving around, but you don't have any sort of significant eccentric component, so it's not going to cause a lot of soreness or muscle damage. So I think they have a really good place for in-season training. Good way to maintain a strength without causing a lot of fatigue. You can probably do a lot of loaded carries without like really making your upper back sore or your legs sore or anything like that. I guess the one asterisk to that would be, we deal with a lot of throwing athletes, a lot of baseball players who do a lot of grip intensive stuff. So we're probably not going to do a lot of heavy farmer's walks when throwing volume is really high because the stress to the shoulder and the elbows and the wrists are already quite high. So in that case, we might do more carries in like a goblet position or anterior loaded. We certainly do a ton of overhead carries, whether it's full shoulder flexion or kind of like a 90-degree position to work on kind of reflexive rotator cuff strength. So there are definitely ways to manipulate it for in-season and off-season, but because of the lack of an eccentric component, I think you can include them year-round.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think really heavy loaded carries in your hands in season might not be a great idea for any athlete, depending on how much they're playing, just because we know that anything loaded heavy in the hand is going to cause more demand on the central nervous system anyway, so it could fry him. I mean, maybe not. Maybe I'm getting a little overboard, but when there are other options, like, anterior loading things, or a lot of times a good option is just you can carry a lot more in two hands than you can with one. So, like, in season, just shifting to more of like just carrying just in one hand, doing like a single arm farmer's carry instead of two, something in that vein, if you will.
Yep. And in relation to volume intensity, I know you changed this or you split it into two questions, but just something I always find myself doing during when I'm programming loaded carries, I almost always put 4 sets just because of the logistics of having to go back and forth.
That's true, yeah.
Because sometimes I program 3 sets where you go down, back, and down, and you have to do a 4th set anyways to bring it way back and put it back where it started.
Might as well do 4.
Yep,
yeah.
So 4 is the magic number.
Yep. Absolutely. And loaded carries, they shouldn't make unless you're doing really heavy loaded carries. You should get a lot of benefit with it without making athletes too sore, which is another good one from an in-season standpoint. There's not a ton of eccentric stress going on, so guys should be able to do them, and then guys or girls, and then play the next day or the day after that, and not have to deal with soreness. Yep. Cool.
All right, so from a general programming perspective, how does your volume and intensity change? Let's talk about off-season first, because that's probably where an athlete is going to spend the bulk of their time unless they're playing multiple sports. And I guess if you're talking about high school athletes, then this gets a little hairy in terms of when is their off-season. But just for sake of making it easy, if somebody's in an off-season, let's say they only play one sport, what are you looking for in terms of volume and intensity compared to in-season?
Well, I think off-season, the way my mindset shifts is that it's more planned out. So if an athlete is in an actual well-defined off-season, let's just say we have 3 months of a well-defined off-season, we're going to go into that with more of a plan. So there's going to be your usual start with a higher amount of volume. The volume starts to dissipate as you get closer to the season and the intensity rises. from an athletic standpoint, that doesn't mean necessarily like from, let's say, like a powerlifting standpoint where the weights just get heavier and heavier closer to the season. I would say more like you start with just a high volume of stuff in the off season. You have your maximal strength stuff going on. You have elements of all the other things that you might have for an athlete. And as you get closer to the season, the intensity ramps up, particularly with things that are more specific to playing that sport. To make things easy, let's just say it's like a wide receiver or something like that. You're going to have sprinting volume start to rise, or sprinting intensity start to rise to full speed closer to the season. So where you might normally see like the highest weights be reached closest to a meet for a power lifter, you're going to start to see your highest running outputs met, not like right before the season, but closer towards the season for your high school athletes. The maximal strength stuff would have dropped off about halfway. I mean, it's definitely a more complicated, training athletes is definitely way more complicated as far as all the different components that go into it.
But you're going general to specific, it sounds like you're saying.
General to specific, and volume is definitely, it's still following like a higher volume, lower intensity to a lower volume, higher intensity closer to the season. You're just seeing a different amount of volumes, whereas like weight training has a higher total volume in the program early in the season. It's got a lower one closer to the season. So if you look at 3 months and say month 3 is your highest intensity work, it's also the time where the volume of the weight training should be the lowest. So the highest intensity work ends up being the running and the jumping and things like that. And then in the off season, I would say, how do volume intensity change? In a perfect world, they change every session, because I think I would like in season to get a feel for where my athletes are at when they walk into the weight room, because depending on what level you're playing, I mean, you might have some kids that, depending on the position and the sport, they might not even be playing that much. They could handle a higher intensity, even higher volume training session. Then you might have another kid that's just being thrown out there every game and he's worn down, and all you're basically going to do is an active recovery session. So in season, you're definitely going to auto-regulate a lot if you can. If not, I would err on the side of having like short but like invigorating training sessions.
I think movement variability is probably pretty important as you approach in season. Yeah. Just because the more you play your sport, typically the more you're going to have repetitive motion going on, especially for like a baseball player. Maybe you get a little bit more for soccer player, basketball player who's doing a little bit more on the field. But I know we like to, for younger athletes, you like to work on a specific lift or a specific exercise for, weeks, months at a time to be able to master that exercise. But especially in season, I think movement variability is important just from a health standpoint and a resiliency standpoint.
Yeah. I saw a question come in from Tyler English. Tyler, I haven't spoken to you in a long time. What's up, man? It's been too long. But it's a great question, because it's the question, really, when it comes to training high school athletes. Is most high school athletes are always in season. And so I would say, like, my biggest piece of advice there is it all comes down to, first, communication and understanding how many different players are impacting the athlete at one time. We talk about this a lot, but you need to have a firm understanding of everything that they're doing. And when you can understand everything that they're doing, it should start to dictate what your role is in a lot of ways. So how much are they doing at practice? How much are they doing at games? How much are they going to see a skill coach to work on some sort of sport-specific skill? In my opinion, what I'm starting to see is they're doing a shitload of those things. And so we're really doing a disservice as strength coaches by trying to be, like all-star strength coaches and saying, okay, now we have to give you this incredible training program that has both conditioning built in and power work built in and strength work built in, because that's all the stuff we learn and that's how we do it and that's how it's going to be great. But like, it's too much most of the time. Stress is stress, and they're getting it from all different angles. So I think I would like to see a trend a lot of times with most of these high school athletes where only training a couple times a week is fine, or ideally coming in and see if they have the time and it's not, more stressful to try to make the time to get in. Coming in 3 or 4 times a week, we're doing shorter workouts that involve, a good amount of movement prep, and we're doing just like I said, shorter, more invigorating workouts, stuff that has them leaving feeling good and thinking of this really long term, because for the most part, we aren't going to have the opportunity to do real conditioning work with them, or true power work, because they're coming in tired from practice or from somewhere else. So take the time to figure out who their coaches are, talk to their, the people involved in their life, their parents or the other coaches, and figure out how much total work is being done and where do you fit in as the strength coach. And also, if you look at all that and you say, hey, this athlete has a really great chance of playing at a high level, and they're being held back by the fact that they aren't getting the necessary amount of, physical preparation that they need, and then that's a conversation where you have to say, hey, you can't play for 3 teams at once. You need to pick, and so that you can get some of this work in. But I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of strength coaches try to do too much, and it's just too much stress for the athletes.
Yep. High school athletes have a lot of cooks in the kitchen,
A lot.
if you will. They get a lot of influence from a lot of different places. They've got their sport coach, they've got their parents, they've got their friends, they've got teachers, they've maybe got a skill coach outside of the team that they play on, they've got us as a strength and conditioning coaches. There's just a lot of people telling them what they should do, telling them what they shouldn't do, and inevitably there's going to be something that's being said to them is going to contradict something else. So they're going to have a hard time figuring out, okay, do I listen to this person or this person? Whose opinion carries the most weight? And sometimes the best thing I think you can do as a strength coach is get out of the way, and make their at least their in-season training so foolproof, so simple that they have the opportunity to play at their best and not be fatigued. Because I've run into athletes who will train much, much harder than what they should in season. The one who I think of specifically, I remember he had a 3-day in-season program, and after his season was over, confessed to me that he took that 3-day in-season program and did it twice a week, every week. So he still trained 6 days a week in season. He's like, yeah, man, I felt awful. Yeah, no wonder. But stuff like that, it's about asking the right questions, and sometimes having hard conversations and just being very matter of fact with that athlete and being like, okay, here's what I'm telling you to do. If you do exactly what I say, you'll have success. If you deviate from this, then you're gonna have problems. I know as a coach, I feel like I'm working harder and getting better at doing that, but sometimes you just can't be ambiguous whatsoever with young athletes. You have to be an authority figure and be firm with your stance about what you're doing, because you have to cut through the noise of all the cooks in the kitchen, if you will, to be able to get through to that athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes there's just not room anymore for what you think is ideal. We know if you want to get faster, you have to run sprints with complete rest, that you can repeat these high outputs. But if they're coming back from practices where they're just running suicides and getting run to the ground, it doesn't mean that you can approach that and say, okay, that wasn't the right way to get faster. That running wasn't right. So now we're going to run on top of that the right way. You're not helping them. Actually what you need to do is not run them anymore, probably. And maybe I'm wrong, but this is my approach is, okay, that's how it is as of now. That's what they're doing for their, sprint work. So if that's their sprint work, what's the best possible other work I can give them to do to complement that, so that we're doing the right amount of work to get better.
So if I can inject a question kind of based on that, I had a conversation with a college athlete today who was talking about their college strength and conditioning program for baseball and complaining about how bad it was, how it's so terrible, we're doing the wrong exercises, and guys are getting hurt and guys aren't feeling good and this and that and the other. And I'm telling my coach, hey, I don't want to do these exercises, but he made me do them anyways. this is a tough situation. You hear a lot about this, right? A lot about high school athletes or college athletes or whoever who are doing strength and conditioning programs at their school that may not be optimal, but they're part of a team. They are being supervised by coaches who are taking into account that athlete's effort and teamwork within a frame of, training as a team. If that athlete doesn't give full effort or, says, I don't like what you're doing, I know it's not right, that's going to probably have a negative effect on that athlete's playing time or just their stature on the team. How do you approach something like that when you have an athlete who isn't doing the optimal program, but if they don't do that program, then they're going to have a bad experience on the team?
Yeah, I would like to give a different answer here than probably. I am really against the approach, and I don't know if you stole this from someone, but I love the phrase. I am against the approach of private facilities creating islands out of their athletes. Like people that think that because I train at this private facility, I am now better than everybody else, and therefore, because I know back squatting isn't as ideal for this reason, I don't have to do it. Like, sorry, life's a bitch sometimes. And you're joining a team, and they have a way that they're doing things, and that's the way it's going to be. And I would much rather, and this is what I try to do, is say, let me see what you're doing, and let me help you. Because I firmly believe, and I think you agree with me, that I can teach someone to back squat if that's what they have to do, and I can teach them how to do it that's safer for their elbow and their shoulder and their knee and their back. And I can make the situation that they are inevitably going to have to live with better, even if it's not perfect. And I don't have to step on their strength coach's toes, who has their reasons for why they want to do something, and I don't want to, shit on their reasons, because if they have a reason for something, then that's fine. What I want to do is help them make the situation as good as it can be for them. And the last thing I would ever want any athlete that trained under me to go forward doing is whining and being a bitch about it. Because I think the much bigger life lesson than whether a front squat, an SSB squat, or a back squat is bigger is learning how to be a hard worker and be part of a team and keeping your mouth shut and doing the best job that you can. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for.
I couldn't agree with you more, man. This very conversation ended with this athlete being like, and the coach doesn't like me. I fucking hate when athletes say that.
The coach doesn't like me.
Oh my god!
AKA, I am annoying and don't contribute anything.
What a piss poor excuse. And if you skip out on team lifts because you don't agree with what's going on,
I wouldn't like it either.
Yeah, if you put forth less effort than your teammates because you're not invested in the process, like of course that's going to reflect poorly upon you and probably going to negatively impact your playing time. So I don't think there's any one exercise that's so destructive, any one training plan that's so superior to another that a high school athlete can't train with their team.
Right.
But like you said, like you can take an athlete, or you can take an exercise and adapt it slightly for an athlete to make it a little more joint friendly or a little more appropriate for their experience level. But I could not imagine being a part of a team and raising my hand and being like, Coach, I'm special and I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do because I don't think it's the right thing for me.
Right. And there's ways to have that conversation. Because I do, they could come up where like something is legitimately hurting, an athlete. That could arise. But I've just been in the game too long and seen too many athletes come in and handle it different ways, and it's pretty black and white. Like the ones that come in and are special flowers are not as successful as the ones who have come to me and say, "Hey, Greg, this is my school program. It's not the same as what we do here. Is there anything I should do, or can you teach me how to do this so that I don't get hurt?" And that, that's best case scenario.
Yep. And like if I'm a part of a team and I have somebody on my team who's putting forth less effort, like I'm not going to feel like I can count on them on the field. You know, what happens in the weight room, what happens in the classroom, what happens in the clubhouse, what happens at practice is all going to spill over to the game. So if you're going to be part of a cohesive team that's all, you know, fighting towards the same mission, you can't let things like exercise selection in the weight room to take away from that. So sometimes you just got to like grin and bear it and go through with it. So that's something that really that irks me when high school athletes come in and complain about their high school strength and conditioning program.
Right. And if you, as someone who trains high school athletes, if you ask yourself right now, do I make myself available enough that an athlete would feel comfortable calling me and asking me to explain how to back squat better because it's hurting their elbow? I firmly believe that we do. So if an athlete comes to me and gives, you know, some kind of spiel like that, I just know that I won't even get into it, but I know that we do all the things, we put them into place so that they feel comfortable making that phone call or sending that email where we're going to help them. So it really comes down to whether or not someone actually wants to work hard or not, or if they just, you know, love complaining about whatever situation they're in.
Yep, and I think it's important to teach athletes how to be their own biggest advocate. Whether it's a pitcher who needs to tell a coach, like, hey, my arm is hanging, I would love to give you more, but I physically can't. Mm-hmm. Or in the weight room, like, hey, this deadlift is bugging my back. I would love to push as hard as possible, but there's just something else I can do. You know, and there's ways to be tactful about it and not just come off as a gigantic weenie and just acting like you're trying to avoid working hard. Right. That's the big thing. You gotta instill work ethic, but you also gotta instill this sense of being one's own advocate, which I think is hard to do if you're 15, 16 years old.
Yeah, but there's something to be said for, like, one thing I try to get across to athletes too is, like, if day one you showed up and you worked your ass off, and every single practice, every single lift, every single thing you did, you worked your ass off, and you have a reputation of constantly working your ass off, and then one day you go up to the coach and say, I can't give you 100% on the deadlift today. It's irking my lower back. I have to believe that they're not going to look at you and say, no, what are you talking about? They're going to say, you work harder than anyone else here. You do everything I say. You try as hard as you can. If you're telling me that this is irking your lower back a little bit, then I'm going to say back off. I don't want you to get hurt because I know you don't hold anything back when it feels okay.
You only get one chance to make a first impression.
Yeah, so
if you set that tone early,
right,
then you have a better chance at being an advocate for yourself.
In this particular athlete's saga, I guarantee you that was not the case.
No, not at all.
And an ongoing challenge for us, indeed. But one you'll have, I'm sure you guys out there have had similar athletes, and all you can do is try to teach them these lessons. And I mean, that's when he came to me with a similar story today. That was what I said. I said, well, that's, you know, tough love. That's the way it's going to be. Let me know if you want me to help you with those exercises because you're going to probably have to keep doing them. Never asked me for help by the end of the day. So we'll see how it goes.
And anecdotally, I squatted, benched, and deadlifted really heavy all through college and never got hurt. Just want to throw that out there. Wasn't the greatest player.
Whoa.
But just saying, it's possible.
Yep. I think, we can find plenty of cases of that. All right, we got to do a second beer. Now that I got to go to the bathroom.
I got to go too.
We're taking a quick...
And am I going to hold it down solo right now?
Yeah.
I feel
Sing
like
a song.
Mike Monetsky at night on WEI, who is also a very big lifter, believe it or not.
What's the next
question
that's coming up?
What's the next question? So we have another question asking about like lifting standards. So this is another one that might play into a lot of like high school or collegiate scenarios where strength coaches might have certain standards for the amount that they want an athlete to lift, specifically in relation to their body weight. So the question is, do either you, Greg, or Tony have an overall standard that you feel all or almost all youth athletes should be able to perform? Dan, John, and Mike Boyle refer to certain standards they feel that athletes should work towards. Examples, if you can bench press 225 pounds, I'm assuming like as a football player. This might be in relation to body weight. I guess we can wrap this into another question that we have further down the line, like how strong is strong enough? Like where do you draw the line in terms of trying to push maximal strength? in terms of like a 3 RM or a 1 RM, for example. Can an athlete squat 1.5 times their body weight or double their body weight? You see a lot of that in terms of saying if an athlete is ready or not to perform certain jumping exercises like depth jumps or something like that. So, do we have any strength standards that we hold our high school athletes accountable to?
I don't love standards personally.
You know what I do love?
Beer.
Beer.
Yeah, let's pour this and then I'll attempt to answer this question. It's not going to be the answer everyone wants to hear, like that I do have, or we have some kind of standards, because it's not the case. But I'll tell you why. So, Tony, what are we drinking here?
We are drinking Alter Ego by Treehouse Brewing Company. Big surprise.
I think this has a little kind of similar taste to what I think we just drank.
Yeah, I think so.
It looks the same.
So
It does look the same.
we managed to find a Treehouse beer that we hadn't put on here yet. So we're slowly making our way through, not even slowly, quickly making our way through the Treehouse regulars. So Alter Ego is an IPA, 6.8% alcohol by volume. This one is called Alter Ego because it's a spin-off of Julius, which we've had on here. The super juicy, super citrusy. What was that?
What?
Speak up?
Nope.
So this is another one of the Treehouse rotating regulars. We picked this up last week, and excited to have another Treehouse on the podcast.
Yep. Let's dig in.
At first sniff, this is definitely a Treehouse brew. Man, that's so good.
It's like the better version of what we just drank because it has
some wheat to it. So I call it like a cracker taste.
Mm-hmm.
Like Doppelganger has this, C32 has this, like crazy. It's a little bit less on the fruit side, so like that pineapple, mango, citrus fruit flavor, and a little bit more on like the. So, man, I need to learn more about beer because I think of like breadiness and malt being associated. I know malt is supposed to be sweetness.
We gotta get a brewer on here.
Yeah, we do. We really do.
I'm gonna really quickly, if you're watching on Instagram, I'm gonna end this and restart it because it seems to be reconnecting a lot. So I'm just gonna end it and restart it.
But I really do think Alter Ego is perhaps the most underrated of all the Treehouse regulars.
I really like Alter Ego.
You know, so if you tune into the show, you understand that every week Treehouse releases 2 cans on Wednesday, and then more throughout the week if they sell out of cans. And they kind of rotate through some regular beers, and there are some that people get really, really hyped for. We've had them on the show, like Hayes, Green, Julius, some of the Curiosity. We had C34 on the show, the Curiosity series. People go nuts for this stuff. And there are some that people get like a little bit less enthusiastic about.
Yeah.
And I would say that, Alter Ego is probably on the lower end.
I love this beer.
But it's so good.
I like it a lot.
It's so good. I would say the lines are shorter when this comes out compared to some of the others, but
I don't know why.
Shame on you if you skip out
Dare
on
I
this
say,
brew.
I like it better than Julius, I think. I know you're a big fan of it, Josh, right?
Yeah.
No?
I don't know, though.
What are you eating?
That's a big... Oh, no, stop.
What are you eating?
Peanuts.
Josh is eating peanuts, probably not part of his macros.
So many calories.
Alright, so to get back to the training.
Low food volume, high caloric content.
Not what you want, but...
Yeah, you could have had a beer. Instead you had peanuts. Really great choice. So do we have an overall standard for... Sorry, there's a question. What's the average bench press for a 15-year-old? This will help answer it. Do we have an overall standard or standard lifts? Like, do we look for? And honestly, no. It's really hard to put a standard on kids ages 13 to 18, high school athletes. There is so much developmentally going on during that point that you could have a kid walk in one day at age 13 and barely be able to do a push-up. Well, meanwhile, there's like a kid 5 months older than them that's way more physically mature that can all of a sudden bench press, 205 pounds. So I really don't know how anyone can put why they put standards on people. To me, that's not important. What I want is like a standard on effort for sure, and a standard on how many times you show up and your consistency. I'm not worried about my athletes performing at a high level if they're showing up consistently and I'm able to coach them and write their programming. Like, we know they're going to succeed. And as far as like how strong you need to be in various lifts for various sports, it's all across the board. I mean, the lifts you need to be strong in for football are completely different than baseball. And then with the same token, you know, I guarantee you cannot bench press, squat, or clean a football player and still make them hugely successful. You know, as much as we do use those lifts, they're great lifts. If for some reason they couldn't squat or bench press, I could still make a successful football player. So, like, to put an absolute on something to the point of saying that there needs to be a standard for it, is just trying to systemize something that really doesn't need to be systemized. And sure, it'll like sell books and things like that, and it will, you know, it could be used as a motivational tool, I guess. Say everyone's got to meet the standard, join the 1,000-pound club, so on and so forth. Maybe. But then you're really kind of fucking yourself over when some kid can't perform the lifts needed to join the 1,000-pound club, and now he's all mentally screwed up because he's never going to be in the 1,000-pound club. You know, I just rather have I do like a running leaderboard of a few different lifts that include like the lifting side of things plus the sprinting and the jumping, and you know, friendly competition's great, but as far as standards, no. Like, if you're confident in your methods and your means, put them into practice. Do everything you can to foster an awesome culture and environment that has kids showing up and working hard. And if you're doing those things, you're going to have success in your business and success with your athletes. And I don't think you need to look for some kind of standards, but that's my answer.
I think setting standards for strength levels gives us as the strength coaches way too much credit. I think something that we need to constantly remind ourselves is that athletes don't actually need us, because so many sports are so skill dependent, and there are so many athletes who have succeeded to the highest level, professional level, Olympic level, making millions and millions of dollars, who don't weight train at all. And like, would they be better if they weight train? Probably.
Yeah.
But you can certainly get there on skill alone. And sometimes you have to take a step back as a strength coach and remember that. And remember that, like, this is all just gravy, you know?
Or would they be worse and possibly get hurt if they fall into the hands of someone that says you have to bench press 225 pounds to be a quarterback and play for this team, when they were already nasty at quarterback? And what you really need to do is you just need to keep them healthy, and longevity is really the
do
answer.
no harm. That's the first thing, right? This first rule. Some of the examples I think of are Kevin Durant couldn't bench 185 a single time, and that's like the number at the NBA combine, whatever, you know, however much credibility that has. Ken Griffey Jr. said he never strength trained, and he was a moose to begin with. Like, he had like the thickest legs of anybody you've ever seen, but one of the greatest players of all time, never weight trained. Tim Lincecum, pitcher, who was notorious for saying he never lifted weights. You know, again, a complete outlier, but it just goes to show you that so many of the sports of the athletes that we train are so heavily skill dependent that you can't make these standards and say, like, in order to be a good football player, you must do X, Y, Z. In order to be a good soccer player, X, Y, Z. And some of these standards saying that, like, you need to be able to squat X amount before you do certain jumping exercises. I don't know if there's, like, research to support these things, but, like, I'm not terribly concerned with that, you know, because as much as I love lifting heavy, movement quality is number one. Being able to make sure that athletes can do basic exercises with a certain competency and movement quality, I think that's going to go a long ways. Fostering, like you said, a great culture and a great training environment and a great work ethic is going to go a long, long ways. You can teach a lot of life lessons without making an athlete, you know, attempt a 1 rep max in the weight room.
And as far as like lifting symmetry standards too, I'm not sold on those. Like, if you can bench press 225 pounds, you have to chin up 225 pounds. Like,
You'd be a pretty shitty bencher if that were the case. If you could chin up what you
I'm
could
just
bench.
not sold on it.
No.
Not sold on it at all. Like, I think you could bench press a lot more than you can chin up. I think you can bench press without fucking your elbows up a lot more than you can chin up. So, these things are nice. They're nice notions, I guess, you know, and they look good on paper, and they but like, if you're worth your weight as a coach, and you understand basic programming and putting balance into a program, it shouldn't matter. Like, you know, you don't need to row twice as much as you press. Like, these are just all absolutes that aren't true. There are there are very few absolutes, if any. And most of the things that I would consider absolutes don't have to do with like strength measures. They have to do with like, here's an absolute. If you show up every training session that you're supposed to for a year, you're going to get better than you were the year before. I absolutely guarantee that. But I don't have absolutes that say, if you can bench this and do this, that you're going to do this. It's not true.
I think those kind of standards actually delay one's ability to work on really, really important physical qualities. If there's anything I've learned from some of the books and the readings that you pass my way and some of the stuff that we discuss in our high school athlete seminar, is that young athletes have a great opportunity to work on some really, really important physical qualities, specifically speed and power, that sometimes get delayed really, really long because coaches like to say, just get strong.
Yeah.
You hear that all the time, and I think it's such a cop-out. Certainly it's the lowest hanging fruit. Strength is one of the, the fundamental qualities of all other strength qualities. But if you're waiting for an athlete to squat double their body weight before you start doing box jumps or depth jumps or whatever, you're going to waste a lot of time and miss out on a lot of opportunities to make that athlete better.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. So, like, there's the thing, like, how strong is strong enough? That's a question that gets asked a lot. And obviously, it's completely dependent on what your sport is. I mean, if you're a tennis player, how strong enough is a lot different than if you're an offensive lineman. But like you said, in the development of an athlete, in the ages that we're dealing with them, between 13 and 18, males and females are a little bit different. That's one of the greatest windows to affect their nervous system from a speed and power development standpoint. And when you start saying just putting such a premium on strength training for high school athletes, is it important? Yes. But as far as how strong is strong enough, most of the time I would say most high school athletes, no, they're not as strong as they're going to be. They're going to keep getting stronger. They haven't reached the peak where strength training isn't important. But what I see more of is strength coaches just defaulting to just making athletes stronger. It's born on the easiest thing you can do.
Yeah.
It's easy.
If being the strongest athlete on the field mattered that much, I'd have been the best player on my college team.
Absolutely.
But I wasn't.
No.
Because I probably spent too much time in the weight room and not enough time sprinting and doing skill-specific drills. I liked lifting a hell of a lot, but probably liked it too much.
Yeah.
Placed too much emphasis on it.
Right. You got a giant room full of dumbbells, barbells, cables, and all this stuff. You want to spend a lot of time in it. But between, I would say, the ages of 12 and 16, there should be a huge premium put on great jumping exercises and progressions and great sprinting and progressions. And if a lot of strength coaches just did something as simply as thinking about jumping and sprinting the same as weightlifting and managing it the same from a volume and intensity standpoint, I think they'd be turning out some much better athletes. You can make gains in strength, into your 30s. But try taking an athlete who's 25 years old and make them that much more explosive or that much faster. It takes a lot more work. If they weren't shown the way when they were younger in those 4 years when they were just getting into high school.
And I think we could really open a can of worms with this next question, and you kind of alluded to it. So another question that we got is, in general, do you favor jumps and throws or Olympic lifting variations?
I mean, I'll try to answer this politically and say, if you're a great Olympic lifting coach and you get kids under your tutelage at a young age, like 12 years old, and you can start to teach them how to Olympic lift at that young of an age. One guy whose stuff I follow a lot is Mike Wadango. I might have pronounced that wrong. Freak Strength. And there's another coach there, I'm sorry, the name eludes me at the moment, and they have like what looks like to be a very young Olympic weightlifting program. And I love watching the Instagram videos. They have kids, using PVC pipes and dowels and unloaded bars, and just Olympic weightlifting is great form. And like those kids, when they get into their high school years, will be able to utilize Olympic weightlifting in a great way. Is it necessarily going to be more advantageous to them than a really great jump program and sprint program and med ball program? I don't know. I think that you can get just as much done with, let's just say they were equal. If you're a great Olympic weightlifter from the age of 12, great. Let's just say they were equal jumps, throws, med ball work. They both were great sources of power development. For the most part, you're not going to get a lot of kids that really know how to Olympic weightlift. So the question is, do you want to take 3 to 4 years to teach them how to Olympic weightlift with the efficiency needed to use heavy enough weights to get the power outputs that you want? Or on the second day that they walk in your gym, do you want to already start doing productive power work with jumps, throws, and med ball work because it's so easy to teach and so accessible that you can start making gains right away? I'm going to opt for the jumps, the throws, and the med ball work every single time. That's my short answer.
And I'm going to give like the nerdy answer that we see so many athletes who come through our doors with issues with shoulder flexion, issues with shoulder mobility in general, issues with anterior core control, issues with hip mobility. Like you look at any hockey player in their teens, and they're going to have some degree of FAI, femoral acetabular impingement, which could lead to hip labral tears, an inability to squat deep. You have a lot of athletes who are dealing with sports that impact them negatively in a physical way. And many of these ways contraindicate Olympic lifting in one way or another. And what I think you find with a lot of the people who do weightlifting at the highest level, weightlifting, Olympic lifting, whatever, I don't like the term Olympic lifting. It's silly to me. But weightlifting, sometimes people get confused. Weightlifting, as you see in the Olympics, the people who make it to the highest level
are Olympic weightlifters.
They're right, but there's some degree of natural selection there, right? Mm-hmm. You're probably not seeing a lot of high-level weightlifters who have FAI or they're not practicing, weightlifting while also going out and throwing 100 innings over the course of a season like a baseball player. So there are all these like competing demands, which I think just make Olympic weightlifting higher risk than reward.
Yeah, I mean, one good point I sometimes bring up is like, how many variations of the clean do you know? How many variations of the snatch do you know? How many variations of the power clean do you know? Like, there aren't that many variations. So if you think that that's going to be a usable exercise for a wide variety of athletes with a wide variety of issues, you're wrong. Like, it's just not true. So, like,
my favorite phrase.
You're wrong. I know a lot of med ball variations. I know a lot of jump variations. And if you can't run, well, then hopefully you're playing golf.
Here's the thing that I hear a lot of counter arguments to that, and they say, well, like, you can't load those exercises appreciably. You can load a clean or a snatch much more progressively because you can add weight to the bar. You can't, there's only a certain degree that you can load a med ball throw or a jump or whatever. But I'm going to tee that one up to you for the big spike. for what you know about loading of Olympic lifts that is actually counterproductive to power development?
Well, right. So a lot of people load Olympic lifts up to the point where if you actually measured the bar speed, you're not even working in the correct. You're not moving anything fast enough to actually be specific to what you want to work on. So for the most part, the people that can move appreciable weight from a meters per second standpoint to be working on the strength categories that would have high transfer to things like sprinting or jumping, like I said, are the very highly skilled weightlifters. For the most part, people are loading up the bar and they're getting it into the finished position, but it's moving so slow that it's not accomplishing the task anyway. So, the caveat to that would be, if you're going to use Olympic weightlifting too, and you think you're doing it correctly, measure the bar speed. Make sure that you actually are. See if a lot of your athletes are. And I think you will find a lot of correlation between, again, simple jumps, throws, things of that nature, which you can load a little bit with weight vests and dumbbells and things like that. Plus, you don't necessarily need to. I mean, you can always do other exercises with a speed emphasis and work on it. You can do barbell jumps. You can squat for speed. And then, like I said, you can get a lot of your stuff done with just working on the strength and then transitioning it into the jump side of things. So
it seems like that middle ground is kind of like a no man's land of like not quite fast enough to really develop sport specific power, not quite heavy enough to develop strength, but it's long been held as the holy grail of power development.
Right. But I urge everyone.
So the correlation or lack thereof is between, what is it, power clean and vertical jump?
Right.
Right. And it's been shown that like kind of the traditional rep ranges, percentages of 1 RM that are typically used to develop the power clean in hopes of improving the vertical jump are just too heavy because the bar isn't moving fast enough.
Yeah, correct. The bar has to move fast enough so that it actually translates to your vertical jump. And like a guy I've seen speak multiple times on the subject, Brian Mann, is someone you guys should check out. So Brian Mann, University of Missouri, I believe, big velocity-based training guy, great information, puts out a ton of stuff on it, presents a lot too. So if you have the opportunity to go see him, go see him.
The one time I went to see him, he like came to the presenting stage to like Black Sabbath's War Pigs, which is pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, no, he's a guy we might be able to get on this podcast. I feel like he would fit in pretty well. So
I think so.
Maybe we'll make that happen. We will expound on this topic a bit further. I think that would be a great guy to get on. Mm-hmm. I didn't think of him. And he might tell us to go fuck ourselves, but he's pretty opinionated, so maybe he will.
That's right.
But we'll try our best.
We got some opinionated guys on the cast right now.
Yeah, that's true. Cool. All right, so we're running towards the end here. We have time. What? One more question?
One more question. Did you get any user submitted stuff during the podcast that's worth answering?
Baseball specific one. Do you want that? Or any tips of helping a baseball player get his arm strength back after injury? It's pretty general.
That's a little too general.
Yeah.
Maybe another night we'll do just baseball stuff. All right. Well, I had one that I wanted to ask you before we left.
All right.
I want to hear your answer on it because I think it's going to be really great. What's the most difficult part for you on working with high school athletes?
Without a doubt, dealing with the parents. Helicopter dads and moms. Goes both ways. Dealing with parents who maybe have a unrealistic view of how good their son or daughter is.
Yeah.
And having to kind of manage their expectations. And that's something we talked about in the online training episode that we did is managing your client's expectations. Yeah. Because if you promise the world and then under-deliver, you're in big trouble. But if you're just honest, honesty is the best policy. If you just be as honest as possible with the parent as far as what the athlete needs. And if you just tell them, like, hey, Johnny or Susie is weak as piss. They're not strong enough to be successful. We need to do X, Y, Z to get them where they need to be. Or tell them what you see in terms of injury risk. You don't want to be an alarmist by any means, but if you come across red flags in the assessment that says, like, your son or daughter had a certain test that showed they might be at risk for this injury, here are the steps we want to take to make sure that they stay healthy and have a good playing career. Just being very honest up front, and when mom or dad says that their son throws 92 miles an hour at 16 years old, you understand that they probably actually throw like 85. It's just managing those expectations, because parents are always going to be exaggerating the success of their son or daughter.
Right. Which is natural, I would say, But yeah, I love what you said about honesty. Like, that's how I would try to approach it too with parents. Is like, especially because the parents are also buying the product, right? Like, they're the ones coming in, and they're the ones that actually have to put the money down so that their kids can train there. And I think the best thing that we can do as strength coaches is just, one, ask why they came here in the first place. Like, what were you expecting? Here's what I'm expecting from you guys. And here is literally what we do. This is your son or daughter is going to show up, and this is what we're going to work on, and this is why we're going to work on it. Sometimes I find myself doing a little bit more of explaining of the training process to parents than I do to the athletes. I know eventually I'm going to explain the whole process to the athletes, but I have time to do that, But parents, a lot of times, like day one, we have the longest conversation, at least about training. You have a relationship with parents throughout the whole process, but a lot of times it ends up being on all kinds of things that have nothing to do with training. So, what's your, to finish it off, like, what's your biggest piece of advice with coaches dealing with parents? What would you say?
I think one thing that I've had a lot of success with is directing all my questions during the assessment process specifically to the high school athlete, and letting them learn to speak up for themselves, and like, even if the parent tries to interject, some way turning it around and bringing it back to the athlete. Because a lot of times I'll ask an athlete, like, what brings you to us? What do you want to achieve by training with us? And they'll say a few sentences, and then the parent will jump in and be like, well, my son or daughter needs to do X, Y, Z because their coach said so. And then I'll try to throw it back at the athlete, and I'll say, what has your coach said that you need to get better at to be able to play more? And I think that teaches them to be advocates for themselves, like we talked about right up front, and to put the ball in their court so they take ownership of their training. Because sometimes the last thing a high school athlete needs is another authority figure in their life.
True.
And they just got, like we said, so many cooks in the kitchen. So obviously you're going to be an authority figure and a role model as a coach, but if you give them ownership of their training from day one, I think they're going to be a lot more successful than if you just be another person, pointing down at them, being like, you must do this. Give them ownership, let them take hold of their own training, and they're going to do well.
Yeah. And I think one thing that does too, it's like, it lets a youth athlete know who's on their side. You know what I mean? It's just like, hold on, this person's on my side. You know what I mean? Like, when the time's right, I've even taken jabs at parents in front of their kids. Not like jabs, but just enough to be like, enough to let the athlete know, like, hey man, I'm your buddy in this situation.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. Now, I've done that probably more often in nutrition consultations, because one of the most common things I hear parents say is like, you got to eat more. Yet, like, literally yelling at their kid, raising their voice and being like, you need to eat more to get stronger. And I've been in nutrition consultations where I've said to the parent, like, hey, I've heard you say this to your son or daughter. It doesn't mean a lot coming from you. All you do is boss them around. So let me take the lead. Let me, kind of teach them the way, and instead of being like telling them what to do, helping them kind of carve their own path. And sometimes you can't just it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as telling them what to do, what they must do, and sometimes you just need to say the same thing with a little bit more tact and a little bit more of a careful tone, even though you're asking for the same thing. Number one, just because you're not their parent, they're going to listen.
Right.
And number two, you take a more careful tone with it, and it resonates more with them.
Yeah. Like, we're role models. We're people that right away they want to look up to us. It's like ours to lose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I could tell every parent, it would be like, do your research. Make sure that you've talked to people that have already trained at this facility you're bringing your kid to. And if you feel confident in where you're bringing them, drop them off and leave. And then wait a month and see if there's an influence on them.
We're not parents yet, so that's
right.
like a hard thing to ask.
It's hard for me to say, but like when I am a parent, I'll probably train my own kid anyways. But
but yeah, a lot of the successful
practice,
young athletes are the ones who aren't handheld through the whole thing. Nothing makes me cringe more than when an athlete comes in on day one and their parent is literally standing there right over your shoulder as you're coaching them, being like, "What's going on?"
Yeah. I just, I try to, I don't know what the word is, but politically as possible, just be like, you're screwing your kid over right now. You're screwing them over. This is how you treat them in all aspects of their life.
Yeah.
Good luck. But
sometimes you got to take the lead. It'll just be like, hey, thanks for sitting in this far. We'll see you in 45 minutes.
Right.
We'll recap it at the end.
We got a flat screen in the lounge with something that you want to watch on it. We'll see you in 45 minutes.
Yep.
All right. Well, we've put in plenty of time tonight, guys. This is definitely a topic we could resurface another time. Maybe we'll get a guest on who is also a great authority on this subject, and we can all go at it.
Tyler English says, when you are a parent, you won't be drinking beer at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday.
It's debatable, but we'll see when we get there.
It's called sleep training.
It's called a beer helmet. Anyways, before we leave really quick, guys, we just announced we're doing our big Optimizing the Big 3 seminar August 20th at Cressy Sports Performance in Hudson, Mass. This is maybe 12... We've done this seminar a lot. It gets better every time. It's polished. It's awesome. It's a great experience. I think you can, see lots of testimonials of people that have gone to it, and we'd love to see you there. When we do it on our home court, it's especially a great time because we can go out, socialize, have interact with everybody. Check it out. We'll put the link in to the page today, and the other thing we'll have a link for is we decided, as much as it pains us that nobody really cares about our beer rankings, but we're still going to rank them. You're just going to have to wait until we post the podcast on the respective websites, and we will put a picture of our beer rankings there for you guys to see.
Yep, just too many cans to wade through.
Yeah, it was kind of a pain in the ass. So we'll do it off camera where you guys don't have to deal with it. Where our guests who are on the show don't have to wait 3 minutes to watch us sort out all the beer cans. So, you got any last?
Timothy Mackey asks, will you be running Training the High School Athlete again? Absolutely. Stay tuned for more dates. This is one that we aim to make as regular an occurrence as Optimizing the Big 3. So stay tuned. We've got a seminars page on thestrengthhouse.com. So stay tuned, and we'll definitely be presenting that again at some point in the future.
Yep. Yeah, that will definitely be happening again. First one was great. They only get better. You know what I mean? They only get better once you get feedback and you see how it runs the first time. So, that's why I'm huge on Optimizing the Big 3. Like, we have that baby polished. Great seminar that helps a lot of people. All right, we will we'll see you guys next week. We'll have a special guest for you. Wait to find out who that is. But we'll see you next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Thanks for tuning in, as always. And if you like everything that we're doing, help us out by subscribing and rating us on iTunes, YouTube. It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
Cheers.
See ya.